grateful to the conference organisers for inviting me for this session. And what I'm going to talk about in the moment, don't worry, I have got a PowerPoint. I will share that in just a moment. What I'm going to talk about now is, I think, very relevant to the theme of future-proofing heritage language education. That, as in that very kind introduction, my interest in heritage language schools links very much to the leadership and management side. My language skills and my language teaching skills would be almost non-existent, but I am fascinated as somebody interested in education, leadership and management in these important schools that you are involved in. The second thing I want to say before I start is that much of what I think I will say today, you already will know. And that's good. But perhaps I will be able to place it into a context for you. And the other thing I want to say is all the things that I am going to suggest are good things to do is what exactly this conference is about. So I hope that things that I say will be of interest, but also the very activity of being involved today and tomorrow in this conference, I think is one of the best ways to address some of the problems around sustainability. So if I just start in a moment, and as has been said already, I come from Roehampton University in London. And we'll just wait for people to mute themselves. Thanks. That's lovely. So yes, as I say, I'm a senior lecturer in leadership and management from the University of Roehampton. That's in West London, southwest London to be very precise, very near Wimbledon, where they play the tennis. And what I want to look at, therefore, is heritage language schools and the issue of sustainability and succession planning in them. Now, these schools, as I see them, meet important cultural, religious and social needs. They're rooted in the community, yet are often seen to be overlooked in discussions, both from the point of view of education in general, also from the point of view of governments and local governments and education systems, but also, I have to say, by colleagues of my own in the area of education, leadership and management. I also am interested in your schools because of your concerns for social justice. However, I am also aware of the concerns about sustainability of schools, and firstly, around organisational sustainability, including the challenges around succession planning. That's particularly the movement and changes are in senior leaders. And that often such schools are quite fragile, that they are easily broken. So I firstly want to explain what I mean by sustainability. Obviously, we are very used to the term sustainability for green issues and caring for the environment. This is very good, I should say. But organisational sustainability has a bit of a different definition. It's the idea of survival of the organisation, of the school. The concept of continuation, that the school needs to continue, that's what sustainability is. And that there should be some stability as part of that survival and continuation of the school as an organisation. And that these are quite crucial in keeping the organisation, the school going, allowing you to do what you are busy doing. That's to say, your business, your busyness, to make a play on English, the thing you are busy about, yeah. And so this is actually what I mean by business sustainability. Yeah. Survival, continuation, stability in keeping the school going, allowing you to go about your busyness. That's what I mean by business sustainability. I'm not necessarily talking about profits and all of that you would get in commercial companies. I know it's different. But it keeps coming back that you are very busy people, busy schools, and organisational sustainability is really important to sustain that busyness. It does always involve the careful use of resources and remembering that resources aren't just the physical things that one might buy, but most importantly, it is the members of staff, it is your colleagues as well, and you. A writer from 2010, writing in a UK context, now I think they are Portuguese originally, or Brazilian, they talked about the potential opportunities offered by recent policy initiatives in the UK can only be of true benefits to these schools, which can improve their management as well as maintain their individuality. That quote is crucial, I think, because Baradas is not just saying about improving management, that is to say, making the organisational sustainable. But that mustn't be at the cost of the individuality of the important work that the school does. So one is sustaining to do the good things that you want to do. One of these challenges, though, to our sustainability of heritage language schools is their invisibility, that nobody knows that they are there to be sustained. You do, of course, so do parents, so do children. But even then, some people who are involved in your schools might not realise that this school is part of something bigger. And that's because of the many names that are given to these schools. Heritage, community, mother tongue, as well as supplementary and complementary schools. These are more popular in the UK. But one of the problems is, and I was at a conference quite recently, where one of the speakers at the conference, who was actually giving guidance on health and safety matters in schools, she later came to me and said, I didn't realise that I'd been to a heritage language school. I didn't realise I'd been to this school, but I always went to, I think it was an Italian school, but I never connected it. So one of our issues around sustainability is actually making ourselves more visible, but also realising through events such as this that we're part of a wider community. That knowledge alone adds to sustainability. As I say, little is known about these organisations, and that's why I'm very interested in them, and especially those who lead and manage them and the tasks that you and colleagues face. So, sustainability, to use the jargon, is about capacity building. It's about doing things that create capacity in your schools for it to continue, to allow you to do the important business. Yes, that is, of course, about pedagogical improvement. It is about promoting improved school outcomes. But there are issues, aren't there, about the extent to which any local or national government supports the work that you do. And this can be very different in different settings. I should say there's not that much local and national government support in the UK, though we do have some charity support as well, and also some very good projects run by some of the speakers that you've got later on at this conference. And therefore, part of sustainability actually is the involvement of lobbying and networking for recognition. Again, of course, this is what FOHLC does. But in addition to that, it's just every time you make somebody aware that your school exists, it's actually adding to the sustainability of your school. That's, I know, again, there's a real problem around a lack of access to resources. And clearly that's part of the challenges around organisational sustainability. And one of those things, of course, is the links with what we call the mainstream, state schooling, or possibly official private schooling. Now, things can be quite difficult here. For example, here's a quote from a big report that Yuvani Mailer did in the UK for the then Department for Education. And she and her colleagues quote a mainstream teacher who had tried some years ago to develop links with a madrasa, but without any success. And yet in the same report, they pick up concerns from mainstream schools, rather from heritage language schools, saying building a good relationship often relied on the supplementary, the heritage language school head teacher taking the initiative and approaching mainstream schools. So I think we all recognise that there are some real difficulties here. On one side, often those in heritage language schools feel that it's always them taking the first steps. It's worth thinking that from the state school point of view, they also think that that sometimes schools don't want to engage with them. Again, I know later on in the conference, we've got some excellent presentations about this and about successful mainstream and complementary heritage school links. So of course, financial sustainability is part of organisational sustainability. But I do want to keep emphasising there's other elements as well. Now, in research that a colleague of mine who used to be at Roehampton University did into Chinese schools, language schools in the UK, the conclusions of her and her colleagues were that all the schools saw themselves as underfunded and under-resourced. That members of staff and pupils complained about this and saw this as an impact on the quality of provision. There was a lack of funding for any teacher salaries, and they felt this affected recruitment, both in terms of just the numbers, the supply, but also the level of teaching experience and qualifications amongst recruits. Facilities were often limited. So we know about these really difficult problems that is being faced and the need to raise funds, and that this can be different in different places. So financial sustainability does matter. I think it is worth thinking about, though, that even in well-funded state systems like the UK, head teachers say, we don't have enough money, we're underfunded, we're under-resourced. And whilst financial sustainability really is important and addressing those sorts of issues is crucial, at the same time, I think recognising it's part of a wider package about sustainability is quite important. Equally important, if not more, is sustaining the staff, the most valuable resource. They're the ones, and through them you continue pedagogical improvement, promote improved school outcomes, even when there is a change of personnel. That's what you're looking to do. Of course, sustaining the staff involves recruitment, involves developing their teaching experience and qualifications when they're with you, and involves professional development. In the special issue I edited with my colleagues, Anna Souza and Lynette Arthur, we had two German speakers, Charlotte Schultz and Marianne Siegfried Brooks, who talked about their experience as part of the German Saturday schools in the UK. And they run the umbrella organisation for them. That they talked about these real concerns about recruitment and how they were constantly looking for recognition, and that they decided in the end the only way to do it was by providing teaching experience and qualifications and professional development. Of course, FOHLC, this conference, is doing exactly all of these good things. So I just want to introduce some ideas now. They are from the world of marketing. Some of you may be familiar with this, but these three elements could be quite helpful for you, particularly once I demystify them. The first thing is, you can do this with a piece of paper and a pen and a cup of tea or coffee or whatever you like to drink. So whilst there are these technical terms, this is something you can do for your school. And if you want to be very posh, if you want to be very sophisticated, you can say, I'm engaging in a strategic marketing planning process. Otherwise, it's just this thing of sitting there and saying, well, what is it that we really want to do? What is our mission as a school? I think that can be quite an interesting one. You might think you have a mission and everybody knows it. But sometimes when you get the group of staff together, you might find missions that you've never thought of. And once you've worked out what that mission is, particular for your school, undertaking what they call a situation analysis. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Now, if you were in marketing, you'd then, having done your situational analysis, you would move to your marketing strategy. That sounds very grand and important. But actually, a marketing strategy is just, how do we go about sustaining our business? Of course, if we were in a factory, it would be, how are we going to sell the things that we are producing? Or how are we going to sell our services? It's different in a school. But if you think of the stages of, what is it that our school is about? What situation do we find ourselves in now? And what's our strategy for going about things? This genuinely is something that just writing it down and realizing that much of this you're already doing can be a really helpful step. I said about the situational analysis. There are lots of versions of this. Doesn't really matter which you do. One is called PESTEL, one is called PEST, another is called STEP. And they possibly work in different ways in different languages. But if I just take you through this, and again, it's something that you could do, perhaps for yourselves, but even better as a group, and genuinely keep it to 20 minutes when you do this with your colleagues. Just start to think about the economics. Yes, where does our money come from? Maybe you have from state funding. Maybe parents are putting some money in. Maybe there are some charities. What's allowable in your own setting though? Could there be other areas of funding? Then thinking about your natural environment. That's of course the physical area in which your school takes place. And that may have changed, possibly by going online. But again, that whole question about where do you do things? And what's the wider environment that allows you to do this? If you're running on Saturday mornings, and here we are with our conference on a Friday evening, I think quite a clever time to have it. But if you're running things on Saturday mornings, but you're in a country where everybody is very busy with their children on the Saturday morning, perhaps look at another time. The other issues are, what are the legal and political ones? In the UK, there's been quite a problem with a number of our complementary, supplementary schools, where they hadn't quite realised the health and safety issues that they needed to address. And there began to begin some concerns that these health and safety issues, not just physically, but also emotionally, were not being addressed. Now, it's not that the schools didn't care, quite the opposite. And for example, a conference I went to in Bradford ran a number of sessions specifically about health and safety. You could not get in the room. I couldn't get in the room. There were so many people there wanting to learn about this. But it's that important thing about what legally are we allowed to do? What are the political issues? How can we work through those? Another one is what technology we have. It's very easy to say, we've got no computers, or we have not got enough computers, and we become very worried about this. But remember, technology could be, in some cases, what we would call quite old-fashioned technology. But what resources do you have? Are they resources that you have, or are they ones that you borrow? And then this final one of the social cultural. What's socially and culturally acceptable in your setting? Are there ways that people who wouldn't think of sending their children to a language, heritage language school, are there ways that this could be socially, culturally more acceptable to them? Because sometimes just a small change in the way that you talk about yourselves might make a big difference by thinking, but what is that case? I've found, and I don't know if it's the case with you, a surprising number of schools where the children who are in them are not necessarily from the heritage language community. One of the first sessions I did on this, a lady from a West Indian background said that she had been to a Chinese school for years because her best friend was Chinese and they went everywhere together. But the parents felt, her parents said, oh, well, it's good socially, culturally for her to know about these things. Sometimes little things like this can make a difference. I hope I've demystified this a little, and it can be a great professional development exercise for you to think through the sustainability issues. It may be the very act of doing this creates a more sustainable organisation by recognising the things that you need to do, but also the many things that you have. So, moving on to this big issue of leadership succession. Here's a quote from some research I did where a Chinese school leader said, the problem at the moment is there are so many regulations, it puts some people off. If I put so much effort in, then it's like running a business. So it's a wonder why people want to do it, yeah? And of course, this real concern around leadership succession is crucial. Here's a head teacher quoted in a piece of work I did with colleagues. And she said, so in order not to close it down, I said, okay, I will take it over, but I had no idea what I was doing. There's an example of leadership succession. As it was, rather successful. The school was successful. But notice here how the head teacher saw themselves before. They were motivated by a wish to have the school continue. They didn't feel ready for it. They didn't feel that they had any idea what they were doing. But they said, okay. And I think this is important to recognise in the case of leadership succession, that either you or the person that you are going to be passing over the role to may not feel ready for it, but that's not necessarily a problem. So when we think of succession planning, it's about the longevity of the school. As I'll say later, it's really important to have these discussions in the school, to be talking about the school existing not just next week, but next year, in 5 years' time. One of the crucial ways that leaders and other colleagues create the idea of sustainable organisation is through talking it into existence, by talking about plans, by thinking about the sorts of things I've suggested. This is what we mean by passing the baton on, yeah? Like in a relay race, or possibly you might see it as like a conductor passing to another conductor for an orchestra. But creating this idea that the baton will be passed and is being passed, that the school has a future. We do that through the way we talk in everyday language. I'll give you an example from another piece of work, from another set of schools. And here, the teacher, who was from a Brazilian background, teaching Portuguese in the UK, she said, I've spoken with them, the staff, about it. I've said, look, I believe that I'm not going to keep this work in the future. There will be a time that I'll stop, and I'd like to train somebody for that, because I don't want it to end. I want to hand the school over in the future. Notice how this head teacher is creating that expectation that there will be a time of succession, and that the way to do this is to be talking about the future. This was in a very small school. Another person that we interviewed said that head teacher asked me to teach at the school. I said yes, because I've been using the school for years for my children. Now it's payback time. And this idea that the head teacher in this case did what we call tapped this teacher. It's the idea, it could be a tapping on the shoulder, but it's also got a link to the idea of tapping something in a pipeline, okay, like an oil pipeline.
Sorry to interrupt. There is only 5 minutes left.
Oh, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you. Okay. I only need 5. That's this idea that there are people there who, if you ask them, you might be surprised that they'll say yes. And this idea of payback, which I think is very strong, actually. Another example here from a different school. Then the other mothers, for fear the school would close down, they got more involved with the project. And the project now is a lot different from what it was then, because the structure's different. It was a wonderful example that we found where the head teacher was really clear that she wasn't going to be there for the next year. And that other people, in this case it was others, got involved. And what they did was they didn't just continue the school in the way it was, but actually their very involvement led to changes in the project. And the ex-head teacher was really pleased about that. So as we pass the baton on, it may well be that things will change, but perhaps we need to be ready for that as well. So it's very much about creating a culture that values leadership development. And that's just, we develop people in the daily ways that we go about things. We grow our own is one of the best ways that many schools do. Developing new leaders, though, could be through shared leadership and management. Giving people opportunities, however small. I remember talking to one head teacher. We were walking down the corridor, and there at a desk, as we went past, she said, "That's the next head teacher." And she explained a bit more. And she said, this person had just come in and said, "Can I help?" And she said, I gave them the task of registering the students as they came. But from that small task, this person gave such confidence, even though they weren't a teacher, that they really did so much with the administration and proved that they were really willing and able to take on a lot of the leadership. Small opportunities. And we do this through mentoring others, but we also do it through modeling. Because with mentoring, we may not necessarily have chosen the right person to mentor, but through modeling, everybody sees that. So yes, tapping those who want to give something back. This is great. Not expecting people to feel ready for the role, that's fine, and reassuring them. Talking about the school having a future. Networking, just like you're doing today. No model will fit everybody. I do realise that. And that's why it's important to think about what it means for your school. Go back to Varadas, that schools need to develop and understand their objectives and make most of their limited resources, but must not lose that particular vision of education or the close links with the communities they serve. This is the balance of what organisational sustainability is. It's all about sustaining your school for the benefit of the busyness that you do. Leadership succession is always difficult. Having a concern for adults as children is key. And finally, developing that wider school culture. That's where you have to have the faith that things will come from there. I have got references, but that's because I'm an academic. I know there's going to be a recording of this so people can come back. And that's why I've just left this on a little bit. Somebody might want to stop and pause it. But thank you so much for listening. And if there are questions, I can see some things in the chat, then I'll be delighted to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was fascinating.
Thank you very much, Anthony. We actually have one comment and one question so far, but please, everyone, if you have any comments, even not a question, please write them in our chat and we'll be happy to read them to Anthony and maybe engage in a conversation. So there is one comment about mainstream schools that when heritage language schools approach them, they're not always interested in engagement. What would you say about that? Is there any way, are there any ways of that?
I think this is so, I think the first thing is, Fatima, that don't feel that you're the only one that has met this brick wall when you approach a mainstream school. I think What will be great though is that later on in the conference, I know that you've got a particular session talking about good examples. And it may be that there's something there that you think, maybe we could do that. Sometimes your local mainstream school is not the best one to link to, but maybe if there is perhaps somebody in your school who works in a school, maybe that's the best link. It's often mentioned that people who are involved in this, who are involved teaching, often don't mention it to anybody else. They just forget to, and yet they may be working in a school, perhaps in a non-teaching role. But sometimes that's the way in, if you've got a link into a school, even if it's not the local one. I can see there's some other questions as well, aren't there?
Yes, there's more questions coming.
Yes. Now,
there is one related to what we just talked about. If you could have some ideas, maybe, how could such a collaboration look like between heritage language schools and mainstream schools? So what could they do together? How could they inspire one another? Who actually should be collaborating, the administration, yes, or the teachers, or maybe there should be a collaboration at some higher level to organize maybe some projects together?
Well, I think you're right at all three, as ever. You're right. It might be, in some cases, it is a case that a local school is very keen to have people from the community coming in the UK, perhaps to give an assembly with a group there to talk about their background. In some cases, it may be, and I think you'll have some examples in the conference, of particular projects in the classroom. But another way through, which has been successful here, for example, with the Albanian community, is actually they went to the school and said, we'll come and talk to your parents. And so they created an after-school club just so that parents could stay behind from the Albanian community. The people working in the school couldn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture. But this half-an-hour session they did afterwards, where they came in and said, let's find out what the issues are, that was a great way in, so that the schools, they then found the schools began to approach them and say, and what can we do for you in return? Do you want to use our premises? Do you want to do this? And also, I think that third idea you mentioned about projects as well. Sometimes Goldsmiths University, and you've got a speaker from there, have done some superb projects, and schools have really benefited from joining that. I can see a question about examples of former students growing up to be involved in a school. And I think you're on to something there. This idea of growing your own. Now, we're all very young here, but sometimes to the young people that we're teaching, we can seem quite old, even me. And I think sometimes one of the greatest ways is to get a younger person involved. Perhaps sometimes they had gone through that, and just saying to them, well, you could do some teaching, particularly if there are people who perhaps would like to do teaching in the future. That thing is, so, but wouldn't this be good for you? Wouldn't this be good for your applications? And often those young people love that teaching. You may only have them for a year. Perhaps you won't even have them for the whole year. But sometimes they can really enliven young people and act as a bit of a link for you as well. Another way, of course, is that I know of a good scheme in the university, I think Manchester Metropolitan University, where they actually are always looking for people places to put their students in, to place their students. And actually, heritage language schools can be an excellent work placement, maybe for university students who could really help with that. I think we talked about some initiatives. And then there's a question here about, well, there's a couple of questions very helpfully here around marketing and how they implemented the strategies.
Yes, and there's also one more about how the schools could work with their missions and vision statements once they develop it. So maybe we could just combine those two questions, and if you could tell us a little bit more from this marketing perspective, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. Now, I think whether you're a small or a big school doesn't really matter. You can do the same exercise. You just have to be a bit careful, you know, is using the technical words the best way to do it? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. You know your own staff. But that thing of just saying, but what are we about? Whether you're a large school or a small school, having your members of staff feel that this is something they're contributing to and naming it is one of the best ways to do it. Often what you find is through this situational analysis is that somebody in the group says, oh yes, well, actually I know somebody who could help, but I never thought of it like that before. Do remember that the operationalizing of strategic plans is not as difficult as it sounds. It's just doing something. So for example, recognizing suddenly that maybe the place that you're currently doing your school in is not the best. You've always used that, but maybe it's not the best place. And somebody else says, well, actually, I've got a place that's cheaper and better. But I thought you were all happy here, so I didn't mention it. It's as much marketing, these strategies are as much a thing, not necessarily that you go out and tell people what you have done, but the benefits come from you as a group of colleagues discussing these things. And as I say, the implementation is just what you do on a daily basis. Maybe, of course, you suddenly realize, well, maybe we ought to mention this to parents and we hadn't thought to. Or then we suddenly discover that somebody's relative or is actually really good at setting up websites and wants to do one. I'm trying to demystify things here and perhaps make them less complicated than they seem. Again, thank you so much for those questions. And I think we've got some lovely comments again from people. I noticed that there's one that's just come in. If politicians start to stress the importance of home language for learning in general, collaboration between mainstream and HL schools should improve. Well, yes, I think that's super. Sometimes a number of head teachers have said to me, it's no good me going to the local school and saying, I want you to do this for me. I've got to go along and say, I can help improve your results. And certainly in the UK, that's what makes them tick. That's what makes them address things. And again, thank you again for the other comments about how we share the same aims and issues. I think that's so crucial. I think coming here, you realise it, but maybe mentioning it to your colleagues is a good idea. I've sat there many a time in a meeting with head teachers, and I went away from having interviewed them, not just in heritage language schools, but in mainstream schools. And I thought, I wonder if they've ever told their members of staff what they just told me. Because if they did, I think their members of staff would really appreciate it. Sometimes it's just saying these things. Anyway, I think I'm certainly over time, if not just on time. So thank you so much for all of those.
You're just perfect on time. We actually were supposed to start a break just this minute, so you're perfect. Thank you very much, Anthony, for the presentation and for such detailed answers to all the questions, including all the comments as well. I think it's relevant to all of the schools. Doesn't matter where the schools are located or whether they big or small or they started years ago or just starting. Those are the issues that all of the schools are facing. So thank you so much for your guidance here, for your ideas, and for sharing your experience and your research with us tonight.
Again, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the session after the short break. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.